My guest today is Dean Karlan. He's the co-author of More Than Good Intentions, a book about how economics is solving and attacking global poverty. Now, you have a co-author on this book. His name is Jacob Hell. And when you wrote it, you did a really interesting thing. You didn't sort of say, Jake, then Dean, or we did this, we did that. You had sort of an interesting narrative structure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, one of the goals of the book was to help introduce the work that's being done to help understand what really works and what doesn't in poverty to a lot of people who don't have access to the academic work and the policy discussions that we're engaged in. So, you know, being a professor, I like to think I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm not good at. And one of the, I'm good at writing academic papers and doing the research. But we really wanted a book that was really reachable and accessible to a lot of people to help bring these things to life. So Jake was someone who was working with me at Innovations for Poverty Action for 2 years in Ghana. And I stumbled upon his blog one day and was really struck by how he was living a life fully engaged with everybody around him and writing really dynamic stories about the trials and tribulations of the people that he was interacting with. So we decided to join forces, and he traveled the world for 1.5 years collecting human interest stories. And we weave these stories in alongside the rigorous research to help people understand so that the stories that we're telling and the lessons that we're learning are not done from pie in the sky and ivory tower, large data sets, macro level comparisons across countries, but really it's about going to the ground at a very micro level and saying what really actually works. And so that's why we formed that partnership.
I think you succeeded admirably. The book is extremely readable and it's engaging, and it's an important book at this time because there really is some very notable progress now in how economists, you're an economist at Yale, are looking at global poverty in terms of not just one monolithic issue that you can solve in some sort of think tank type way. There's empirical approaches being taken with randomized trials and so forth. Do you want to talk about a little bit how that sort of played out and how you're trying to communicate that through the book?
Sure. So, I mean, you said it just perfectly. It's not a monolithic problem. We're not going to find and there's kind of two things that when you say that it makes me think about from that we talk about in the book. One is that there's not a single solution. Anybody who says there is should immediately
leave the room.
You just immediately look at them and say, well, wait a second, you lose some credibility. So context matters, but individuals matter. You could be in the same context and different people will have different needs and there'll be different answers for different people, and that's part of the challenge. And that's part of the work that we go into and we discuss. A lot of the issues that we deal with in the developing countries aren't so different than some of the problems in America too. And some of the things that I struggle with, that people struggle with in the U.S., are some of the lessons that we can learn about how to deal with that also apply in developing countries. And so we talk about some of those issues as well.
I mean, we're all human. But just give some people an idea, and I think some of our viewers don't necessarily know the scale of this problem. I mean, you cite a figure in the book saying that half of humanity, full 50%, is living on $2.50 a day. And this is already adjusting for the cost of living in these places.
Absolutely.
It's remarkable to me that you could do that. And it seems to me that it makes the scale of the problem somewhat overwhelming. But individual people can actually help, right?
So I think there's two ways of looking at that. It's kind of one is that the scale of the problem is huge, but on the other hand, because of the dire poverty in so many places, it doesn't take that much to really make a big difference. And so you can look at it from both perspectives, but that's one of the lessons that we've learned, and we have identified through this work some things which are really not that expensive that an individual can do, and because of the poverty is so dire in some places, that money can really make a big difference. And so with the huge tragedy actually comes big impacts that can be had from small actions.
And it's interesting that you say, throwing money at the problem doesn't seem to be something that's effective. I mean, we've done a lot of that. I mean, certainly you've heard that before. But really targeted type things, like you talk about deworming in schools. And can you tell me a little bit about that? It seems such a cheap and highly effective use of funds.
Absolutely. And this is a perfect example, going back to what I said, we have really strong evidence to suggest to do this. But I would not still say that this is the single bullet, right? I mean,
right, of course not. No,
right. I mean,
no.
we don't want to say that this is going to solve all the education and health problems, right? But what we do know is through very careful work of doing very similar interventions, all targeting how to increase school attendance. right? And so take 7 or 8 different methods, all different, very good, sensible approaches that if I said them to you, you'd be like, that sounds sensible, and there are a lot of groups doing it. So we test 7 of them across side by side by side. And then what we want to know is, okay, for every $100 we give, which one gets the most
Right.
bang for that buck? And the answer in terms of school attendance in areas that have deworming was to actually, and the deworming is what makes the distended bellies for
Right,
children
right.
and things like this. And so giving them a simple 25-cent pill to help them get rid of the worms makes them healthier, makes them stronger, and makes them more likely and able to go to school. And the kicker on this one was that 10 years later, the researchers who were involved in this is one of those examples of research that I didn't do personally,
Right.
but I'm reporting on, and it was done by members of our group and coordinated by Innovations for Poverty Action, the nonprofit that I started. And so 10 years later, the incomes are considerably higher.
It's a fantastic outcome, and the book, we only have a second or two left here. The book is chock full of these sort of very concrete things that from around the world that are just fascinating. And there's one other one I just want to touch on really quickly is the chlorine dispensers, which is again a very sort of obvious sort of thing, but one that has huge impact.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key lessons about the chlorine dispensers, and what the chlorine dispenser is it's a simple little device that sits by a well, and when you go and get your water, and you have a vat of water, you put it under the chlorine dispenser, you twist a little crank, out comes a dollop of chlorine into the vat, you walk home, by the time you walk home, the water's clean. Again, comparing the same way we do the deworming, dollar for dollar
Right.
put into this reduces the biggest reductions in diarrhea. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this one is the technology of chlorine that's not new, right?
No.
Right. So the innovation here is how to get people to actually use things, right? And this is something where we can learn a lot from the United States, right? How do you market? How do you
Right.
market successfully? And in some sense, what this chlorine dispenser was, it's a nudge, to borrow the term from Dick Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It's understanding the decision-making process. No family wants diarrhea. Right? And if you sit down and have a conversation,
that's right.
you'll recognize chlorine's good. The question is, how do you actually put that into the daily life in a way so that it happens without them really having to think about it and proactively make decisions to get the clean water? And this chlorine dispenser was a great nudge in that context.
It's excellent. Thank you so much for being here. My guest again is Dean Carlin.
Great. It was great to be with you. Thank you.